Welcome to episode 102 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to talk UTSA basketball. Let's get started. Well, we said that the women's team was going to achieve their goal of 20 wins this season, and they did it. We're now 20-3 overall, 11-1 in conference.
It was a battle to get there, but sometimes you got to fight a few battles to get your goals, right? And they did it.
Yeah, these definitely have not been the prettiest games that we're going to talk about, but they were gritty, they were resilient, and at the end of the day, they were wins.
I mean, sometimes it can't always be pretty, right? And
Sure.
we probably talked a little bit about that throughout the season for the women, but there have been games where it has been pretty and it has looked just dominant. This felt like a game that probably should have been, or at least the Wichita State game will feel like it should have been one that should have been much more dominant.
Mm-hmm.
And the score will show that, but it wasn't. And I think when we look at the North Texas game, we're gonna see there's gonna be parallels between, or at least similarities between North Texas and Wichita State. So, ready to get started?
Yeah, I think I have to ask you, though, before we start for both of these. Are we now a second half team? Is that fair to say?
I mean, I don't know if offensively we're a second half team, but we're definitely, our defense is just different in the fourth quarter. That overall is what really helps UTSA solidify their wins. You know, they just put teams away in that last quarter, and these two games present fourth quarters where we did clamp down on our opponents.
All right, well, let's start off by talking about North Texas. We won that game in the Convo 54-52. And the first thing that just sticks out about that score, first of all, is that it's eerily similar to the men's game that we talked about on the last pod. They beat North Texas 54-50, and here the women beat North Texas 54-52. It's like 54 is our new magic number against North Texas, I guess.
Well, let that be known to Jeff Traylor when he runs up the score on North Texas next season. But yeah, I mean, it felt like it was eerily similar in terms of the game styles, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was interesting because, you know, both teams really struggled shooting the ball. That's where I think the story has to start when we play it against North Texas, because they're just, the script should have been that we were able to get out on the court and kind of run on North Texas. But the reality is that wasn't the case. And so it kind of bogged down. And much like the men's game that you referenced there in Denton at the Super Pit, the men also had a game that bogged down. And we talked about it a little bit in our last pod, which was, for some reason, you know, Coach Clonch had slowed the game down in order to essentially just eke out that win.
Right.
And that's essentially what we have happened here, but a lot of it I don't think wasn't really slowing down. It was just we just couldn't execute. And so, but neither could North Texas. So that put it in a spot where, you know, I think you said it plenty of times, it was just a dogfight.
It's interesting because at one point you had asked me, do you have any high heart alerts? Because this game was so close and it was back and forth. And I didn't. And I think I told you, this team just makes you believe that they're going to win. Even in these close games, I'm not nervous. I just feel like they're going to win. And I can't necessarily say that about a lot of teams, but
No, you
this
can't.
team is different from that respect.
There is something about this UTSA women's basketball team that you seem to be, I don't know, you're really confident in, even when they're like in these close games. And it just cracks me up because there's other teams that I would be like, oh yeah, I think I'm more confident in them pulling this game out, and, you know, whatever game they're in out. So, I mean, it's not like I don't believe in the women's basketball team. It's more the fact that or at least I keep feeling like at some point they're just going to get overwhelmed, right? Because that's
Right.
what happened against South Florida.
Right.
At some point, just everything just catches up to them, and you're like, you know, it was bound to happen, right? We were bound to drop a game, and it just feels like we keep teetering that line at times when we, like you said, we find a way. But
I think part of the reason why that didn't happen in this game, though, was just the environment within the convo. You know, we've talked a lot about attendance. We've talked about people, you know, now starting to see the success and starting to show up. And this game was really a great example of that, because prior to the start of the game, Coach Aston had said, I'm not really sure what the attendance is going to look like. It's a Tuesday night. A lot of the high schools in the area, play on Tuesdays. And I've had coaches tell me they would have liked to have been there to see two Texas teams play. But at the end of the day, we had over 1,400 people in the convo. The place was rocking. The band was into the game, and we had kind of a fun environment, first of all, because there were so many UTSA teams there. The softball team was there. You saw the football team had a lot of people there. The basketball team was there. And actually, we ended up having a couple of the guys from the basketball team sitting next to us on the court side, and they were just into the game. They were jumping up, at different plays. They were yelling out, to the girls, trying to encourage them and kind of trying to get into North Texas' head. And I think they did a couple of times.
Yeah, they did. And I think one of the North Texas players just, I think she was trying to stay away from our sideline because of the fact that the guys just really giving her a hard time. So it's, like you said, it was a great environment. Obviously that really helps you as you kind of move forward. But, I do have to call this out before really we go on about like talking about UTSA here. But I felt like Jason Burton, who's the North Texas coach, did a great job in testing our guards. He consistently pressured our guards, and it really caused a lot of UTSA turnovers. And we had so many problems, and we would have easily closed out the game had it not been for that type of guard pressure. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that I think is one of the weaknesses of this UTSA team. We struggle with backcourt pressure.
Yeah.
And that has to be a solution that the team has to start kind of coming up with, because you're going to get that in the tournament, if you go on and play in some other tournament, whether it's the NCAA tournament, whether it's, the NIT, the Women's Invitational. I got to say, Kyla Deck from North Texas came off the bench, which is an absolute pest. I mean, just absolutely bothering Sydney and Nina.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely saw, especially in Nina's game, that the pressure was really getting to her. The game before that with Temple, she, I think, was the high scorer. Yeah. And then you see in this North Texas game, she only scores 1 point. It's off of a free throw, and she gets into foul trouble. And then Sydney, as you mentioned, finds herself in foul trouble quite a bit. So these players who have been kind of our stalwarts, Adara, Sydney, Nina, you see them struggle in this game. Yeah. And we're looking to, other players to come in off the bench and kind of give us that spark and keep us in the game so that, we can get some time for these folks on the bench, and then they can come back in and not make their foul trouble any worse.
Honestly, I've underestimated just what North Texas has put together and what really Jason Burton has put together there in Denton. They honestly have the type of guards and the front court to really beat this UTSA team. And they really, to me, should have won that game. They just let it slip away because of some bad shooting, particularly at the free throw line. And I think that's going to be the key that we talk about here. North Texas shoots 31.6% overall. UTSA shoots 32.7%. So it's pretty even there, right? Like, we're each team is missing, right? North Texas goes 2 for 12 from 3-point line. UTSA goes 0 for 18. I mean, that we'll get into in just a second, but UTSA shoots 18 for 25 from the free throw line. North Texas goes 12 for 24. Them going 12 for 24 at the free throw line with the environment, it probably played a big part in the loss. Right. And that's the one that gets away, because they honestly had an opportunity to tie up the game late. But again, here comes one of our stalwarts, Sydney Love, with a big defensive play and blocking Wooten as she tries to take a jump shot. I told you during the game, I felt like at times the North Texas guards, when they were going up for a shot, they were slow to get that release off, right, and they were showing too much ball, and it was easy for UTSA, if they got beat, to recover quickly and block a shot. And that, to me, I think is something that Jason Burton's going to work on if they play UTSA again. You got to get that quick release. You cannot be just putting the ball up and then jumping to like take the shot. You've got to shoot that shot. Otherwise, you're not taking advantage of the lapse in UTSA's defense. So that to me, I think is a big deal. But I mean, again, you have Jordan coming up big, 26 points, and then Adara, a double-double, 11 points, 10 rebounds. With the way things were going, it just felt like it felt like we didn't have control of the game at the end,
Right.
yet we did.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's weird to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, after we left the game, I ended up having you watch with me the last couple of minutes of the game again because those last 4 minutes, you just really didn't know who was going to come out with it on the end. Were we going to be able to hold on to this victory? And we just managed to find a way. But for too many points in time during that game, it just seemed like if we weren't going and getting the ball to Adara or Jordan in the paint, we just weren't going to score, and you can't just have a one-dimensional offense, which, look, it worked for this game, but, it's something that we're going to have to fix as we move forward in conference play.
I'm just going to tie a bow on North Texas here by saying something that you always usually say about UTSA teams when they lose in the crunch, which is, snatch the loss in the jaws of victory. This one was we snatched a win in the jaws of loss because like I said, we tried to give the game away to North Texas, and North Texas just wouldn't take it. So now we get to Wichita State. Go up to Wichita, beat them by 18 the first game. So I thought, all right, as I mentioned earlier, this should be a more dominant win. This should get us back on track. It wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the score only, we won 60-49. You would think that it was a great win for us, and that it was a dominant win for us, but that's really not the case. I mean, it wasn't until, again, the last couple of minutes of that game that we really were able to take control. The majority of the game, we were, playing from behind. It just seemed like we were between, 2 and 4 points, and we just couldn't quite get over that hump. It was another bad shooting night again. We shot 23% in the first half at one point. Overall, we shot 28.8% in a win, which is just incredible. And then when you look at Wichita State shot 29%, you would think, okay, well, they shot 29% overall. We shot 28%. It seems like from that stat, Wichita State should have won. But once again, it really came down to the fact that we made more free throws than they did.
Yeah, I mean, again, one thing that I think that we probably haven't said as much is UTSA has a knack for finding a way to get to the foul line.
Right.
And in doing so, that's where they've been cooking. Because right now, we're talking about Wichita State, which we'll dive a little bit deeper in here. But you mentioned the bad shooting. We talked right now just a little bit ago about North Texas, another bad shooting night. We go back to Temple. It was another bad shooting game. We're in the midst of a rough 3-game stretch of shooting. We are ultimately we're shooting about 32% overall for the games. But here's the big difference. We're shooting about close to 41% from inside the 3-point line. Okay, it could be a little higher because we could get some better shots in the paint and sink those. But we're 9 for 57 from 3-point land over those 3 games, which is 15.7%.
Yeah.
That's just not going to do it, or that's going to put you in a position where, honestly, you should be losing all of these games, but you're not because you've got that defense and, as we talked about, the free throw line, because we're 67 of 86. We're shooting almost 78%, about 78% from the free throw line, which makes up for the fact that we just can't buy a shot from 3-point land. And that really fills up the points for us. It's the easy points. You're going to go to the charity stripe. You got to hit both shots. And, our team is hitting those. So that really, I think, has been a big part of the reason that UTSA has been able to prevail along with the defense. Because let's be honest, Atovs, I've commented to you, a few times, but especially in this 3-game stretch, it's become even more magnified that we just look disjointed on offense at times. And a lot of it comes from, once again, our guards getting pressured. And in this game, Wichita State head coach Terry Nooner, who was a former Karen Aston assistant when she was at Texas. You know, he gets beat by 18 the first time in the convo. He comes back, and clearly he looked at film from that game and looked at film from North Texas, because he started pressuring our guards and really attacking our guards on offense and defense. And
Right.
what it really caused is the fact that it really drains the shot clock for the UTSA team, and so now we can't be as patient on offense. Now we all of a sudden feel a little hurried, and we seem to really struggle with that team wise. So what happens there a little bit more is that you now can't find Jordan in a good spot, right? Like now there's just not that time for the patience. So there's certainly, I think, teams have caught on, like I said before, how to get to this UTSA team. And we really have to figure out those solutions, because if we're also not hitting any shots from outside, we also are not creating space for Jordan, right? Like Jordan can't operate. We can't drive to the basket. So there's a lot of things that are happening here, but certainly I know it was frustrating for a lot of people watching the Wichita State game when they look and see the fact that we were running into the same problems like we did against North Texas.
Right, for sure. In this game, Adara fouls out. Now, again, that last foul seemed a little bit questionable, but
Hey, hit the weight room is all I'm saying. Not Nadara, I'm saying
the other girl,
Wichita State girl.
But overall, she's still the high scorer at 14 points, and she has 12 rebounds. So another double-double. Kind of that we can still find a way even when these pieces of adversity hit. But to me, I think there was a turning point in the game where Asia hit a three-pointer, which we've just mentioned. Three-pointers have been kind of our Achilles heel all season.
Yeah.
And I don't know that Asia's taken, very many shots or made very many three-pointers this season anyways. But Asia comes in, she hits that three-pointer in the fourth quarter. We get the lead at that point, and we hold it the entire time after that. And part of it, again, was that we had a couple of fouls that came through, and we were able to send, shooters like Sydney and Jordan to the free throw line, and both of them are very good.
Automatic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it just seemed that we finally got our confidence back. But it really took until, those last couple of minutes. I mean, I think there was maybe 7 minutes left in the game when Asia hit that shot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, sometimes you need that injection. I thought that Asia's big three, it reminded me of some big threes we had last season when Sienna Gudadaro came off the bench and would hit a big three, and it would just help us kind of extend that lead a little bit and give us that cushion.
Or Cheyenne hitting the three in the Temple game.
Right. That momentum that kind of gets us moving forward and, ends up clinching the game for us. So, yeah, I totally agree. Those are some big-time moments. And one of the other things I really wanted to highlight, though, as we were watching, the Wichita State game, was the fact that there was even some talk from the Wichita State, commentators about UTSA, and Terry Nooner ends up getting a technical foul because of the fact that he's, trying to tell the officials that UTSA is, kind of pushing off with their offhand, especially our guards. And our guards do that a lot. They do. Watching closely, I have seen them, really pushing off a lot. Now, as I say that, some of that is because the defender is also at times grabbing onto that offhand arm. So, I mean, I think that there's a way to make sure that there's no foul called there, but you're also going to give the offensive player a little bit of leniency, especially if they're trying to rest free of that. And I think the officials in all of these games have been fair. I mean, it's been well officiated games. They're always going to miss a call or two, but I guess where I'm getting to is, for our opponents, it may seem like UTSA is getting the benefit of calls. The difference is that those teams are getting the same calls. They're just not hitting their shots. UTSA is getting a call and then they're executing after that. That's the difference between a championship team and a team that's lucky to get into the tournament, right? So that's the growth, I think, that you have to see from Wichita State. I think they'll get there. I think Terry Nooner is doing a really good job to come back from losing by 18 in the convo and then, coming back home and really again, should have beaten this UTSA team, but they didn't. It shows a lot of growth.
Yeah. The other thing the commentator pointed out was, we played 12 players during this game. So we pretty much emptied the bench.
Yeah, trying to find an answer, right?
Yeah. But a lot of the girls that played were freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, which means they're going to be back next year. So when you look at this roster, really, it's just Nina and Jordan that are the two seniors, which is crazy when you think about, how much returning production we're going to have next year and potentially how dangerous we're going to be in conference again next season.
Yeah, it's nuts. And so for the way that I'm kind of shaping this kind of frustration with some of the plays and some of the issues that this UTSA team has, we are forgetting that they are young, like you said, and that is encouraging. And I think, but it's also scary for the rest of the AAC because, they're finding solutions to their problems, but they're like, well, those players are going to leave next year for next year. We get to come back with a pretty good team. So just to tie a bow on the women's basketball team here, they are currently in ESPN bracketology. They sit as the automatic qualifier from the AAC. They're predicted to win the AAC tournament, and they would be a 13 seed right now, predicted again, versus NC State in Raleigh. So a 13 seed. It may not sound like much, but man, 4 years ago, we were barely able to win games in conference, and to get to the point where now we are within the conversation of bracketology and we're sitting atop the AAC, winning some of these close games that we had previously lost before. Atos, obviously we've talked and raved about what Coach Aston has done, what the staff has done, but these girls, and I should really say ladies, these ladies have been fantastic both on the road and at home, and I can't wait to see them.
Yeah, I mean, we control our own destiny, and that's the best position to be in.
Absolutely.
Well, our next two games are at home. We play East Carolina Wednesday at 6:30. The game will also be on ESPN Plus if you can't make it out. And then we have our rematch against Memphis on Saturday, February 15th at 2 p.m. Hopefully, this game in front of the Convo will be a little less shaky than the one that we saw in Memphis.
Hopefully we can get those wins. I'm not saying we won't, but I think that there's just some work that we've got to do to make sure that our shooting's better and that our defense stays intense.
Yeah, but definitely having as many people pack the Convo as possible will help. All right, let's talk about the men's team.
All right.
2 back-to-back heartbreaking losses in the Convo. The men are 10-13 overall, 4-7 in conference, and 9th in conference standings.
Both games were just lapses in late game execution and just situational awareness. And it's weird because for the most part, you have a team that has a lot of veteran players. Now, of course, you can say, well, maybe they didn't have like that type of experience wherever they came from. But the reality is you would have expected a little bit more awareness as to here's where the shot clock is, here's, what we have to do. And so I also don't really want to blame all of it on the players. And it's not about blame. It's more about just realizing that there's a deficiency right there, right? So we have to get better from the player side. But I think from the coaching side too, we need to go ahead and lay something at Coach Clonch here, because I think he could have found better ways to get his players in better situations and at least give them an opportunity to close out the wins.
Yeah, and I know this is not to make excuses, but this is also where our lack of depth is really hurting the team.
Yeah.
We've talked in the last pod about, the injuries and the personal situations and other things that have come up. I mean, we're really consistently playing 8 guys. And when you just have 8 players, and then when you get into foul trouble, which we'll talk about in some of these games, you can just see that fatigue really kind of setting in these games.
Which is opposed to the women's team, right? We talked about the women, just a little bit ago, and how they keep finding a way to win, right? Like that they're doing what they need to do down the stretch to get that win. Some of it's because of the depth. Yes, Karen Afson has some young players, but she keeps putting some of them into different situations during a game to where not only it gives our big-time players some rest, it also starts giving some experience to some of these
Mm-hmm.
young players. So she's very strategic in how she's doing it, and I think that's something that Coach Clonch does not have the luxury of doing to this point.
Right.
And because of it, it just feels like it lets me recall, I think, the last couple seasons of, of UTSA women's basketball, because we were frustrated by the fact that there were games that they should have closed out, but they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're starting to see that now with the men. And I mean, I don't know. So I feel like it's better, right? That we're looking at them in this situation as opposed to what we saw in the last few seasons.
Right. I mean, yeah, you said this after the game. Like, look, it's better to be frustrated by two close losses than it is to be talking about a blowout where we just didn't have a chance.
I mean, I know we're talking about, 8 players that Coach Clonch is essentially playing. This team is much more talented than the previous versions of the UTSA men's basketball teams. And yes, they do have a way to go, but I think we can agree that they've given us a chance to at least be much more competitive in the AAC than we had been last season.
Right.
So let's get to the Tulane game. A 61-60 loss to Tulane, and I'm kind of laughing because again, it's more the frustration. There were some things that could have been, I think, rectified here. But let's start with you. You had a key observation that I think kind of scans not just this game, but the next game as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Tulane game really just reminded me a lot of the Tulsa game that we talked about on the previous pod, where in the Tulsa game, we had just put everything on Primo Spears. He scored 40-something points in that game. And this game, Primo's out, and we just put the game really on Smurf and on his shoulders. And, he scores 28 points, but then towards the end of the game, you see him getting tired. You see him having some mental lapses, and he goes cold. And it's right at the time that Tulane gets hot. You can't have a game where you're putting so much pressure onto one player, regardless of their experience or who they are. You got to have some, players surrounding them and, really kind of trying to step up at those moments so that you have that balance. And in both of these games, we didn't have that at that time.
That's a fair point, because I feel like, especially with Smurf, I think it's a good lesson learned, I guess, is the best way to put it, excuse me, because of the fact that he is a young player. And so we hope to have him continue to stay here at UTSA. And so I understand that, but I also think that Coach Clonch here could have found a way to either take the ball out of his hands and put it in Raekwon's. Raekwon has been bringing the ball up at times.
Mm-hmm.
That's gotten Primo and Smurf off the ball, which really should lead to them moving around and giving this offense or giving that defense a different look. But it just doesn't happen. And I think Coach Clonch is still trying to figure out how to coach through these late game situations. And so, again, you have Smurf who, doesn't have that experience like you talked about. And then you have Coach Clonch, which it feels like he kind of freezes up a little and doesn't know just yet what buttons to push with this UTSA team. Now, that doesn't mean that he hasn't had some good moments. North Texas was one. But I think, if you start looking at the second halves of both of these games, you start seeing a little trend here. And we'll start with the fact that I know that you've talked about the fact that, with just 8 players, they get into foul trouble, right?
Yeah.
The depth becomes an issue. And it became an issue against Tulane because late in the game, Joe Smith fouls out. And it really leads to Tulane in the second half shooting 16 free throws. UTSA shoots 12. Now, that's not as big of a margin as we would think, but still, we're sending Tulane to the line with the clock stopped, and that's how they end up winning the game, right? They win it with 2 free throws. UTSA just doesn't attack enough, and I think part of that is the depth issue that you've been talking about, where we settle for jumpers.
Yeah, definitely. And, it's not like we don't have other guys on the team that can score. And we did have, Raekwon in this game with 11 points. Damari Monsanto had 9 points. We were kind of hoping that Scuda Joseph came back in this game and that he was going to have, a big game. But, he only played 12 minutes and just felt like he didn't quite get into that rhythm this game.
Here's where I pause here, Atos, because I feel like, is it him not getting into the game, or is it Coach Kalance hasn't, again, figured out how to get him into the game and
Yeah.
like get him engaged? Because it feels like we were talking about Scuda as more of a, I think, a bit of a savior, I think, when his eligibility issue got cleared up early in the
Yeah.
season.
He was supposed to be kind of the big scorer that was going to come in.
Right.
And, it just hasn't quite played out that way.
A lot of it, I wonder, is just his style of game. I think it's more attacking the basket, or attacking the basket, excuse me. And I don't see him do that as much. It feels like he's kind of standing outside, being more of a shooter. And, again, it could be the depth thing again, where trying to save some energy later in the games. I mean, overall, this UTSA team, what happens in this Tulane game is that they shoot 26% in the second half from the field. From 3-point range, they're 13%. Like that's just tough work. And then you look at Tulane. I mean, they don't really shoot that much better, but they find ways to win that game. So let's get to East Carolina. We get Primo back, but a bit of deja vu, huh?
Yeah, I mean, definitely this game. You have Primo back, but they start out strong and they just get worn down in the second half. And then you see those, mental mistakes. And once the gap in the score closed and East Carolina tied the game, I just kind of was having flashbacks to Tulane and to the Tulsa game. Like, is this where we're going to fall apart? And unfortunately, we did. You have foul trouble that comes into play again. In this case, it was Bob Nige that gets into foul trouble and gets fouled out. Although all of our big guys got into foul trouble early, David Hermes,
Oh, yeah.
Joe Smith, and so he's kind of trying to rotate these guys, but he's having to let them play because there's nobody else to bring in. And, he's really trying to counter the height of ECU.
I mean, they lost a lot of height with Jaquan Scott now no longer being with the team, and then Monage with the season-ending injury. I mean, there go two of your guys that were going to add size to this team, and again, it's really reducing what Coach Kalance can do at times. So I feel like he can still find a way to, kind of get into the laboratory, so to speak, and figure out ways to get this UTSA offense moving, because it does become stagnant, Atos. I mean, and again, it could be the depth, but they start standing around at times. And when they move the ball around, I feel like everybody stays engaged, and it keeps it makes the defense work. And we're just not doing enough of it. Again, I think it might be the depth. I think it could be the fact that he's trying to balance minutes. He's trying to, I mean, again, with the foul trouble, you've got different guys in different situations that I don't think he was anticipating. So it does make it difficult. But, again, in the second half, East Carolina shoots 17 free throws to UTSA's 8 free throws. You've got to be able to attack the basket, and you've also got to be able to hit free throws when you get there. I mean, this UTSA team is quite high in the nation in free throw shooting percentage. So we hit our free throws, but we just don't take it to the basket enough and force that foul. And I think that's what it really also comes down to, is that we've seen when the UTSA women have had some problems, it's because they're looking for a call as opposed to being aggressive and playing until they draw that call. You kind of see it here with the UTSA men, especially when you see the free throw disparity, but you also see the problems where Primo has some late game lapses here, where I think he wanted to play a little hero ball at the end. And I get it. You want to close out the win. You're up by 4. I don't understand that ECU goes to trap Smurf, which was smart. Get the ball out of the guy who's got the hottest hand, right? Like make sure that he's not dictating anything, right? And then one of the things that you always kind of have a little problems with is, the fact that we pass backwards. So Smurf,
it just always makes me feel like something bad is going to happen, even if it doesn't.
Sure, but Smurf passes backwards to Damari. Damari then finds Primo on the wing. Essentially, when you're watching the game, it's at the bottom of your screen. Primo gets it. Now, there's an ECU defender around midcourt And Primo, for some reason, instead of just trying to either take that guy on one, decides to dribble away from there and go towards the pressure. That to me was a crucial mistake because I think, again, he was looking potentially to get fouled by that group of 3 ECU defenders. But why are you going towards that pressure? Like, that's, again, situational awareness where that should not have happened whatsoever. Okay. So that happens. Ball gets stolen from him. He's looking for the foul. Comes down, and then he fouls guy in the act of shooting who hits a layup. Just, I mean, if you're going to foul him, which you know you're going to get called for a foul, like it's going to happen, go for the ball. Make sure he doesn't get that shot off, right? So that's one of the things. But I think the most egregious part of it was right after that, where, again, the ball gets passed in. He takes the spot where Smurf was in the previous play, and he gets trapped. But he brings the ball down, and ECU wraps him up. We had already had the ball wrapped up once from us, and it had gone our way. Now it's ECU ball, and it's just he's a veteran player, and I felt like he had better chances to put this game away. And I understand why you want to put the ball in his hands. I'm not arguing that. It's just those lapses, right? Like that.
Yeah.
That I felt like he could have come up with some better plays there.
And they're probably having this conversation right now as they're watching film, and talking about how this could have gone differently. But
and here's the deal: like, let's go back to how you had started this when you said that I had said, well, it's better to be looking at these close losses than what we had before. I mean, before it just felt like there's just no way you would have caught up to the opponent, right? And now we're talking about nitpicking and like really getting after some of the late game issues. And so I'm in a good spot there in terms of where I feel like this team has at least progressed to. Again, Coach Conch is in a bad position, I think, with just the amount of players he can play, which I think everybody knows that they can just wear down the runners, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because we've had, again, now 3 games where we've built up these big leads, and then it's just problematic to try to sustain them with, the fatigue, the small mental mistakes, that happen. But man, at the end of the game, when Coach Conch walked by us, he just looked very frustrated. He kind of looked like a guy who's running out of ideas right now. So
yeah, and I mean, I don't blame him. I mean, you're trying to figure out a way to really get these guys in the best position, right? And I honestly don't think that that's what they had talked about,
right?
In terms in their huddle for the timeout. So I told the guys to keep their heads up. A lot of the guys told me, "Hey, I appreciate it. Hey, I appreciate it." Whether they meant it or not, I mean, you could take it however you want, but I think they understand that at the very least, we're behind them. We're there for them, but it's at some point they got to make sure that they actually get through this and get this mental block out of the way and close out these games.
Yeah. Well, next up for the men, they travel to Wichita State on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Game will be on ESPN Plus, and then on Saturday, February 15th, they play at Tulsa, 5 p.m. on ESPN Plus. And before we finally wrap up the men's section, you kind of alluded to this earlier, but Jerry Briggs did report on some roster updates. Jaquan Scott and Skylar Wicks will not return this season.
And real quick, you brought up Jerry Briggs. Shout out to him. Like, last pod, we didn't really complete that thought, but Jerry Briggs and Joe Alexander have been doing a fantastic job of just covering both basketball teams and really all the sports, but especially with the basketball teams, it feels like we talked about everybody kind of jumping on the bandwagon, right? It's like they have been religiously covering the basketball teams, and it's great because it gives us an opportunity to see what we missed as well.
Before we go, let's talk a little bit about National Signing Day.
Okay.
We went to the National Signing Day event, and the majority of the signees were actually there at the event this year, which is different than has happened in previous years. I think they said they had about 21 kids there. And part of that's because 25 of the 29 kids that we've signed are on campus already. So that really helps, them to kind of get into a groove, learn the culture, try to get to know each other before we get to the fall season. And we were able to talk to 2 of the players, Brandon Tucker, who will be a linebacker, and Kiki Meyer, who will be one of the cornerbacks.
Yeah, it was fun talking to them. You know, Tucker looks like a linebacker. Like he just looks like as soon as you see him, I'm like, okay, he's got to be a linebacker or he's a running back. But
I know I did. He did ask me to guess his position, and at the moment I just like blanked on who he was, and so I said I was gonna say running back. I know that's wrong though. He was like, "Well, I played running back in high school." I'm like, "Okay, well," but I knew that wasn't the position. I just couldn't like think right when he walked up. So
but it goes back to what I just said, which was he looks like a running back or linebacker, right?
yeah,
And so you at least got one of them right. But I mean, what he's playing here in college, I mean, I imagine that he's going to do some great things with Galen Scott because I think Galen has done a good job with the linebackers. And then KK Meyer, I just had a nice little talk with him about soccer, which was weird. It was like, oh, he's interested in soccer. And we kind of, had a nice chat about it. And, I think he's going to be needed, obviously, because we have essentially Zay gone, Denver gone, and then still up in the air with Cyrus as to whether he's coming back or not. There's some eligibility concerns, or trying to figure out if he's going to be eligible to return, I should say. So, at least I think what I saw from KK just in person, he seems like the type of cornerback that UTSA goes for.
yeah, and just a couple of facts about the two of them that I learned after the fact. Brandon Tucker is a transfer from East Texas A&M, formerly Texas A&M Commerce, but he was the Southland Conference Defensive Player of the Year. He set the program record for the most tackles in a season at 141. So again, we'll have to see kind of how he makes that jump from being at an FBS level up to the FBS level.
Sure.
But, definitely sounds like he's going to be a great addition to the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then one of the things to note about KK Meyer, he is a transfer from Nevada. He was injured late last season, so if you look at his stats, that'll come into play. But in his redshirt freshman season, Nevada played Texas State, and KK returned an interception, 98 yards for a touchdown. It was the second longest interception return in Nevada history. So hopefully we can look for another big play for him when we play Texas State this season.
Yeah, that would be big. On the offensive side, quarterback Noah Lugo, I think, is probably the one we should keep an eye on. He's a transfer from BYU. He's expected to be the backup for Owen. He's got 4 years of eligibility. Probably should have come here from the very beginning, but, got some experience at the P4 level. So, good for him. And then wide receiver A.J. Wilson, I think, is the other one. Probably remember him from the Houston Christian game. Big one-handed catch over Zach Morris, which made SportsCenter top 10 plays of the day. He had 8 touchdowns last year and 825 receiving yards. So hopefully he can actually, I would say, adapt to FBS and give us a good receiving threat there for Owen.
Yeah, a couple other players to note. On the defensive line, obviously, they took a big hit this season because of all of the guys who graduated. So one of the players that I think everyone's really excited to see next year is Keon Roberts-Day. He's a transfer from Baylor. Coach Haynes said that he will play on the boundary, described him as really twitchy and explosive. And then on the special team side, Breck Chambers is a JUCO punter of the year who will be transferring this season. He averages 45 yards per punt, and they mentioned that he will be in the competition to be the starting punter this season. So it sounds like, we'll have some good competition for Cale Hogan, and, hopefully that'll just elevate both of them.
Yeah. So one thing before we kind of move on here, Atos, was we both had a concern with something that Kurt Traylor said about an offensive lineman. And he said, the guy's at about 340, 350 and needs to lose about 15 to 20 pounds before the fall camp, essentially, to really get going. And, Atos, we talked about the fact that this UTSA coaching staff continues to find, offensive linemen that seem to be bigger than what the playing style really fits. And it concerns me when I hear that comment because of the fact that Jeff Traylor had just said previously to introduce all these coaches, oh yeah, we learned some things about, our injuries. We had the most injuries, season-ending injuries in the nation. And, here we are. We went through everything. It's not all about, strength and conditioning. There were some other things as coaches that we need to work on, blah, blah, blah. And then Kurt Traylor comes in and drops that. I don't know what to think, Atos. Like, the minute I think Jeff Traylor is moving forward with his coaching staff and figuring out solutions, we hear the comment like this, and it's like we're still making the same mistakes.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. He did mention that spring ball will start March 25th, which is a little bit later than they've started in the past because he did want a couple more weeks on strength and conditioning.
Yeah.
We'll see, whether or not that really plays the part. But then again, you hear the story about, Big Rel needing to lose all of this weight. And, he's a transfer. So he's obviously been playing with that kind of weight. Just,
But does that, again, we don't know.
How does that translate? Yeah,
Right.
because he's coming from Bowie State, which is a Division II school.
That, and we don't know the playing style that he was at. If it's as fast as the Roadrunners try to go, again, like, I think we just need to start looking differently at the offensive linemen, and that's what concerns me. I'm not concerned about whether any of the offensive linemen can play. They can, but can we continue that pace that Coach Traylor keeps saying, I want to keep playing fast. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned Cyrus Dumas earlier. They're also waiting to find out whether Cade Colenbach will have eligibility for the season or not. Apparently, they're both JUCO players, and so when the announcement came out about the fact that JUCO would have another season, somehow these two weren't quite in the right class that was covered under that initial injunction. So from what Coach Traylor said, they haven't gotten a definitive answer yet, but their attorneys feel confident that both Cyrus and Cade will be able to play next season. So right now they have a spot on the roster, but it remains to be seen.
Right.
He did announce that the spring game would be at the Alamo Dome on April 26th. The time is to be determined, but, mark that date, April 26th, on your calendar.
It's during Fiesta, so.
Yeah, it'll be a true Fiesta game
again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing they mentioned at signing day was that the House settlement is expected to have some details come out on April 7th, kind of letting us know exactly what that final settlement will be. It'll then go into effect July 1st. So April 7th is another date for us to kind of keep an eye out for. Once we get those final details, then UTSA and the American Conference will really be able to solidify the revenue sharing piece and, be able to communicate that not only to the players, but also to, the donors as well. In other news, UTSA softball started off their season with 4 straight wins at home. 2 of those were walk-off wins. Right now, as we record this, they're playing in a tournament championship against Weber State. So hopefully they're doing well. Haven't been able to check on that score.
Yeah, and really it's good to see them, taking the baby steps to improving the program. I know that a lot of these teams in the tournament aren't like big name teams. However, that's how it starts, right? That's how you start getting that momentum is you get Van trying to figure out, like, are we getting the pitchers? Are we getting the defense? Are we getting, some hitters going? And I think she's just trying to straighten out the program and, much like Karen Aston did. And we'll see how she progresses in year 2 of her rebuild.
Yep. UTSA Soccer will also be announcing their spring exhibition schedule soon. We got to talk a little bit to Coach Pittman at one of the recent basketball games. He mentioned that their final exhibition game will be against UT Austin in Austin. So that sounds like an exciting game, and we'll be looking to share more details when they're available.
Yeah, he did share one key thing was that he's going to have 28 players due to the revenue sharing. And
roster
he's had,
limits,
roster-wise. So right now he's at 31. He says, so going into that UT Austin game, he's going to be looking and he's going to have to cut 3 players. He's like, I haven't had to cut anybody before, and now this is where I'm at. So it'll be interesting to see, if anybody transfers out as well, if those 3 players are the only ones that leave as well. So, still some movement going to happen with UTSA Soccer, probably some good things that are happening though, because we could see other teams above, like in the P4 level, drop some of those players. Maybe those players start coming down to UTSA and to any of the AAC teams, which just helps improve the product, right? So,
yeah, I think one of the things that people forget about when they look at the House settlement is just they focus on revenue sharing, but there are some other ramifications to this House settlement, which include roster limitations on some of these Olympic teams that haven't had to, make these types of roster cuts in the past. So
Right, and Coach Traylor actually during the National Signing Day event had said, "I'm going to be able to keep all my slots." So I think all 85.
yeah,
So it's a good thing, right? But at least we now know for the Olympic sports, like you said, it should get interesting. Just how things boil down.
yeah. Well, I think that about wraps it up for us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atovs.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back soon with some more basketball coverage.
Birds up.